The wind howls through shattered windows, carrying with it the eternal winter that grips Castle Cainhurst. Snow falls endlessly here, blanketing courtyards where noble blood once flowed freely through cobblestones, where laughter echoed through grand halls, where the finest wines were shared beneath crystal chandeliers that now hang like frozen tears. If you stand perfectly still in these forsaken corridors, you can almost hear it, the ghostly waltz of phantom nobility, their spectral forms still dancing to music only they can hear, forever trapped in their final moments before the executioners came. Welcome, fellow seekers of forbidden truths, to Keen 7 Lore, where we venture into gaming's darkest corners to unearth stories that deserve to be told. Tonight, we're ascending the treacherous path to Cainhurst Castle, crossing that nightmarish bridge where death horses thunder through eternal darkness to uncover one of Bloodborne's most haunting questions. What crime could possibly warrant the complete and utter annihilation of an entire noble bloodline? What transgression was so unforgivable that even now, decades after the massacre, a martyr sits frozen upon the castle's highest tower, maintaining an eternal vigil to ensure that no one ever discovers the truth about what lies within? The answer, as with all things in Yharnam, is written in blood. But whose blood tells the true story? Is it the corrupted vitae that flows through Queen Annalise's immortal veins, marking her as an abomination that threatens the very fabric of the Church's holy mission? Or is it the innocent blood that stained Logarius's blade as he and his executioners butchered every man, woman, and child within these walls, all in the name of purity? Cainhurst Castle stands as a monument to extremism, a frozen tomb where religious fervour met political ambition, where the victors wrote history with the blood of the vanquished. Yet despite the Church's best efforts to erase them from existence, the Vilebloods persist. Their queen still sits upon her throne, behind an iron mask that cannot silence her voice. Their covenant endures, passed down through blood and secrecy. Their story refuses to die, no matter how many executioners try to bury it beneath sanctimonious rhetoric and holy justification. To understand why the Vilebloods had to die, or rather, why the healing Church needed them to die, we must first understand what Cainhurst represented before it became a cautionary tale whispered in Yharnam's darkest corners. We must peer through the veil of propaganda that Alfred so eagerly spreads, examine the evidence left behind in blood-stained letters and forbidden tomes, and question whether the monsters in this story are truly the ones we've been told to fear. Before the eternal winter, before the massacre, before the word Vileblood became synonymous with abomination, Cainhurst was something else entirely. Picture, if you will, a castle perched majestically above the Sulwititman clouds, its spires reaching towards stars that still held wonder rather than cosmic horror. This was the seat of Yharnam's old nobility, bloodlines that traced their ancestry back through centuries, perhaps even to the ancient Thumerian civilization, whose ruins still dot the landscape beneath our feet. These weren't merely wealthy aristocrats playing at importance. They were the keepers of traditions older than the healing Church itself, custodians of knowledge that predated the discovery of the old blood. If you're finding yourself drawn into this tale of betrayal and blood, I'd genuinely appreciate if you'd hit that like button. It makes a real difference in helping this deep dive reach fellow hunters seeking the truth behind Yharnam's darkest secrets. Your support through the algorithm truly helps keep these investigations alive. The nobles of Cainhurst lived lives of almost incomprehensible luxury. Their banquet halls hosted elaborate feasts where foreign dignitaries mingled with scholars, where art and culture flourished alongside political intrigue. The castle's libraries contained volumes of forgotten knowledge, texts that scholars from Byrgenwerth itself would journey to study. This wasn't merely wealth, this was power. The kind that comes from centuries of accumulated influence and carefully guarded secrets. The Cainhurst nobles understood blood in ways that went beyond the crude ministrations that would later define the healing church. To them, blood was lineage. Blood was history. Blood was the very essence of what separated nobility from common folk. Yet there was something else about Cainhurst, something that would prove instrumental in both its rise and catastrophic fall. The nobles possessed an unusual affinity for blood consumption that predated any contact with the old blood of the Great Ones. Some scholars suggest this originated from their Pthumerian heritage, as the ancient Pthumerians were known to have practiced blood rituals long before Jehannam existed. The nobles didn't simply use blood for healing. They understood it as a medium of power, a means of preserving and passing down essential qualities from one generation to the next. Their wine glasses at those legendary feasts. Many contained more than just fermented grapes. This cultural foundation becomes crucial when we examine what happened next. For when forbidden knowledge arrived at Cainhurst's gates, it didn't fall upon unprepared soil. The nobles were uniquely positioned to understand and embrace what others might have rejected as blasphemy. They had the knowledge to recognize power when they saw it, the ambition to seize it, and perhaps most dangerously, the bloodline to withstand its corruption, or so they believed. The betrayal at Byrgenwerth marks the turning point where Cainhurst's story transforms from one of noble privilege to one of tragic downfall. A scholar, whose name has been deliberately erased from history, made a choice that would echo through generations. This wasn't a simple theft, not merely an act of academic espionage. This was a fundamental breach of trust between institutions that had once shared knowledge freely. Byrgenwerth, that hallowed seat of learning where Master Willem pursued his vision of evolutionary transcendence through insight, had discovered something in the ancient labyrinths beneath Jehannam. The old blood, that miraculous substance that could cure any ailment, heal any wound, perhaps even grant immortality itself. But this particular sample, this specific vial that made its way to Cainhurst, was different. Alfred tells us it was forbidden blood, but his zealotry clouds the truth. What made this blood forbidden? Was it truly corrupted, as the Church would later claim, or was it simply too pure, too close to its original source? Some evidence points to this being blood of a Great One itself, perhaps even the blood of Queen Jehannam, the Pthumerian queen whose wailing still echoes through the Chalice dungeons. If the Cainhurst nobles truly descended from Pthumerian bloodlines, such blood wouldn't corrupt them. It would awaken something that had long laid dormant. If you're finding value in unraveling these ancient mysteries with me, consider subscribing to join our growing community of lore enthusiasts. Your support truly makes these deep investigations possible, allowing us to venture further into gaming's most intricate narratives together. The transformation that occurred at Cainhurst after the Blood's arrival wasn't immediate. This wasn't some dramatic metamorphosis where nobles suddenly sprouted fangs and developed an insatiable thirst. No, the change was far more insidious, far more gradual. The blood enhanced what was already there. The nobles' natural affinity for blood consumption evolved into something more profound. They discovered they could perceive qualities in blood that others couldn't, could taste the echoes of power within it. More disturbing still, they found that certain blood, the blood of hunters specifically, contained something special. Blood dregs, they called them, those tiny precious droplets of congealed vitae that held within them the accumulated strength of those who had consumed the old blood and survived. Queen Annalise, who would become the last of her line, emerged as the most successful practitioner of this new art. Where others might have been driven mad by the blood's influence, she achieved a terrible equilibrium. The blood didn't corrupt her so much as elevate her, transforming her into something that transcended normal human limitations. She became functionally immortal, her body regenerating from any wound, her consciousness persisting through trauma that would destroy lesser beings. But this immortality came with a price, an endless hunger, not just for blood, but for those special blood dregs that only appeared in the veins of the most powerful hunters. The healing church watched these developments with growing alarm. Here was an alternative to their monopoly on blood healing, one that didn't require their blessing or their mediation. Worse still, Cainhurst's methods were proving remarkably effective. The nobles who partook in their Queen's Blood Communion weren't succumbing to the bestial scourge that plagued Jehannam's streets. They were becoming something else. Refined predators, perhaps, but retaining their humanity, their consciousness, their noble bearing. They called themselves the Vilebloods, though in the original Japanese, the term translates more accurately to blood relatives, suggesting not corruption, but kinship, not vileness, but belonging. The church's response was as predictable as it was brutal. They couldn't tolerate a rival power, especially one that challenged the very foundation of their authority. The blood ministers had built their entire power structure on the premise that they alone could safely administer the old blood, that only through their holy communion could citizens receive its blessing without falling to beasthood. Cainhurst's existence suggested otherwise. It proposed that with the right bloodline, the right knowledge, the right approach, one could master the old blood without the church's intervention. So the propaganda began. The term Vileblood in the common tongue was no accident. It was carefully chosen to inspire revulsion and fear. Stories spread through Jehannam's streets of the depraved nobles who drank human blood, who threatened the purity of the church's healing blood with their corrupted practices. The truth that Cainhurst's blood consumption was selective, refined, even ritualistic in its precision, was buried beneath layers of religious rhetoric. The church positioned itself as the defender of humanity against an inhuman threat, when in reality they were eliminating a political rival whose very existence undermined their legitimacy. Martyr Logarius, leader of the executioners, became the church's willing blade in this holy war. His fanaticism was legendary even among the zealous ranks of the church hunters. To him, the Vilebloods weren't merely enemies. They were an affront to everything sacred, a corruption that needed to be purged from existence. His executioners shared this fervor, their massive wheels spinning with righteous fury as they prepared for what they saw as a holy crusade. The church gave them carte blanche. Every Vileblood was to be eliminated, down to the last drop of their tainted blood. The night of the massacre remains one of the darkest chapters in Jehannam's blood-soaked history. The executioners didn't simply attack, they conducted a systematic extermination. They moved through Cainhurst Castle with methodical precision, room by room, hall by hall. The noble knights of Cainhurst, for all their skill and their blood-enhanced abilities, were overwhelmed by the sheer brutality of the assault. The executioners didn't fight with honor or nobility. They fought with the savage efficiency of those who believe their cause transcends normal morality. The evidence of their methods still litters the castle. In the corridors, you can find the remains of bound women, their throats slit while they were helpless to defend themselves. These weren't combatants. They were servants, handmaidens, perhaps even children whose only crime was living within Cainhurst's walls. The executioners made no distinctions. Noble or servant, man or woman, adult or child, all were Vilebloods in their eyes, All were corruption that needed to be cleansed. The Knights of Cainhurst fought valiantly, their blood-enhanced strength allowing them to cut down many executioners before falling. Their armour, specially designed to ward off blood attacks, proved less effective against the crude brutality of the Church's weapons. The executioners' wheels, those massive instruments of torture repurposed as weapons, crushed through elegant defences and noble bearing alike. This wasn't a battle, it was a slaughter, and both sides knew it. Yet for all their thoroughness, the executioners failed in their ultimate goal. Queen Annalise could not be killed. They tried, evidence suggests, repeatedly, and with increasing desperation. But her consumption of blood dregs had transformed her into something beyond death. Every wound healed, every fatal blow was merely a temporary inconvenience. She sat upon her throne, watching her entire lineage be exterminated, unable to die alongside them. The frustration of the executioners must have been palpable. Here was the source of the corruption they sought to eliminate, and she was beyond their reach. This is where Logarius made his fateful decision, one that would define the remainder of his existence. If the Queen couldn't be killed, she could at least be contained. He ordered an iron mask be placed upon her head, its weight and design intended to humiliate and silence. But even this proved insufficient. Annalise could still speak through the mask, still command whatever loyal servants might find her, still offer her blood to those willing to continue the Vileblood line. So Logarius chose martyrdom. He would become the eternal guardian, using his own transformation into an undead sentinel to ensure no one could reach the Queen. Consider the weight of that decision. Logarius condemned himself to an eternal vigil in the frozen wastes of Cainhurst's highest tower. He sits there still, his body long since passed beyond life but animated by pure will and religious conviction. The other executioners left, their grim work seemingly complete, but Logarius remained. He became a prison warden whose sentence would never end, a guardian whose watch would never cease. In trying to contain what he saw as ultimate corruption, he corrupted himself into something arguably worse, an undead creature sustained purely by hatred and dogma. The Church declared victory, the Vileblood threat had been eliminated, they proclaimed, the corruption purged from Yharnam's vicinity. They spoke of Logarius as a hero, a martyr who sacrificed himself to protect humanity from an unspeakable evil. But what they didn't speak of was the political victory they had achieved. With Cainhurst fallen, no alternative to the Church's blood ministration existed. Their monopoly was secure, their authority unchallenged. The noble bloodlines that might have questioned their rise to power were extinct. Or so they believed. Queen Annalise, trapped behind her iron mask, became something more than just a prisoner. She evolved into a symbol of survival against impossible odds. Despite the Church's best efforts, despite Logarius's eternal watch, she persisted. Alone in her throne room, surrounded by the ghosts of her slaughtered subjects, she waited. And eventually, impossibly, people began to find her again. Hunters who questioned the Church's narrative, those who sought power beyond what Yharnam's blood ministers would provide, those who simply refused to accept the victor's version of history. These hunters would brave the journey to Cainhurst, past the broken bridge that only the most determined could cross, through halls haunted by spectral nobles who continued their eternal dance, past gargoyles and bloodsuckers that had made the abandoned castle their home. They would face Logarius himself, that self-made martyr whose boss fight remains one of Bloodborne's most challenging encounters. And those few who succeeded, who managed to defeat the Eternal Guardian, would find their way to the Queen. Annalise would greet these visitors with a dignity that centuries of imprisonment couldn't diminish. Behind her iron mask, her voice remained strong, cultured, even welcoming. She would offer them a choice: join the Vilebloods, become her knight, hunt other hunters for their blood dregs. It wasn't the corruption the church claimed it to be. It was a covenant, a sacred bond between queen and knight, a continuation of traditions that predated the healing church and would outlast it. The blood dregs themselves tell a fascinating story about what the Vilebloods truly sought. These weren't random drops of blood taken from innocent victims. Blood dregs only appeared in the blood of echo fiends, hunters who had themselves consumed vast quantities of blood echoes, who had grown powerful through the same system the church employed. The Vilebloods weren't corrupting pure blood. They were harvesting corruption that already existed, concentrating it, refining it. Queen Annalise's ultimate goal, to bear the child of blood, the next Vileblood heir, wasn't about spreading contamination, but about evolution, about creating something that could transcend the limitations of both human and Great One. This brings us to one of Bloodborne's most fascinating characters in this narrative, Alfred, the self-proclaimed knight of the church and last of the executioners. His obsession with completing Logarius's work borders on the pathological. When we meet him, he speaks of the Vilebloods with a venom that decades haven't diluted. His version of history, the one he eagerly shares with any hunter who will listen, is pure church propaganda. The Vilebloods are inhuman monsters who threaten the purity of blood healing. Cainhurst was a den of corruption that needed to be cleansed. Logarius was a holy martyr whose sacrifice must be honoured. But observe Alfred's actions rather than his words, and a different picture emerges. His determination to find and destroy Queen Annalise goes beyond duty. It's a personal vendetta, an obsession that has consumed his entire existence. When he finally gains access to the throne room, when he finally has the opportunity to complete his master's work, what does he do? He doesn't simply kill the queen. He brutalizes her, grinding her flesh into paste with a fervor that speaks to something far darker than religious devotion. He laughs as he does it, covered in her blood, reveling in violence that would make even the most hardened hunter pause. This is the true face of the executioners, stripped of their holy justifications and religious rhetoric. Alfred's actions reveal what the massacre at Cainhurst must have truly been like. Not a necessary evil performed with grim determination, but a slaughter conducted with savage joy by those who had convinced themselves their victims weren't human. Even after reducing Annalise to mere flesh, Alfred can't truly kill her. Her consciousness persists, her flesh waits to be restored. His victory is hollow, his life's purpose revealed as futile hatred. The irony of Alfred's fate shouldn't be lost on us. After completing his grisly work, he returns to where he believes Logarius's grave should be, only to find nothing. His master never had a proper burial, because Logarius never truly died. He transformed himself into something neither living nor dead, an eternal guardian whose martyrdom was perhaps more about pride than sacrifice. Alfred, having defined his entire existence around completing his master's work, finds himself with nothing left to live for. His end, whether by his own hand or simply from the collapse of purpose, is as inevitable as it is pathetic. Throughout all of this violence and vendetta, other threads of the Vileblood story weave through Jehannam's streets. Lady Maria, one of Gehrman's greatest students and a hunter of remarkable skill, carried Cainhurst blood in her veins. Her rakuyo, that elegant trick weapon she wielded with such deadly grace, was a treasure of Cainhurst. its design reflecting the castle's preference for skill over brutality. Yet Maria rejected her heritage, threw her weapon into a well, and ultimately took her own life, rather than continue the cycle of violence her bloodline seemed destined to perpetuate. Maria's story provides crucial context for understanding the Vileblood tragedy. She wasn't corrupted, wasn't a monster, wasn't driven by inhuman desires for blood. She was a skilled hunter who happened to carry Cainhurst blood, and that heritage brought her nothing but sorrow. Her presence in the hunter's nightmare, eternally guarding the secret of the fishing hamlet, suggests that the sins of bloodlines run deeper than mere corruption. The nobles of Cainhurst, the scholars of Byrgenwerth, the ministers of the healing church, all participated in atrocities that transcended their institutional boundaries. Even more intriguing is Arianna, the woman of pleasure we can save in Bloodborne's main story. She carries Cainhurst blood, evidenced by her ability to share her blood with hunters and the specific nature of the grotesque birth she undergoes if she survives long enough. Her existence proves that Vileblood descendants survived the massacre, hidden among Yharnam's population, their heritage a secret that could mean death if discovered. Arianna doesn't know her true nature, doesn't understand why her blood is special, but the church would certainly kill her if they knew what she was. The Bloody Crow of Cainhurst, that devastating hunter who appears in Eileen's quest line, represents another survivor, one who has fully embraced the Vileblood covenant. Their skill with the Chikage, a weapon that literally uses the wielder's blood as its power source, demonstrates the pinnacle of what Vileblood techniques could achieve. They're not a mindless beast or corrupted monster. They're possibly the most skilled hunter we face in the entire game. Their prowess a testament to what Cainhurst's bloodline could produce when properly cultivated. These survivors raise an uncomfortable question. If the Vilebloods were truly the inhuman monsters the church claimed, why do their descendants live among Yharnam's population without causing the chaos and corruption the executioners supposedly prevented? Why does Arianna's blood heal rather than harm? Why does Maria's legacy inspire respect rather than revulsion? The answer, perhaps, is that the church's justification for the Cainhurst massacre was built on lies from the beginning. Let's examine what the healing church actually gained from Cainhurst's destruction. First, and most obviously, they eliminated a rival power that could have challenged their monopoly on blood healing. The nobles of Cainhurst had wealth, influence, and now with the forbidden blood, they had an alternative method of achieving the transcendence Yharnam's citizens sought. They could have established themselves as equals to the church, perhaps even superiors, given their noble heritage and ancient bloodlines. Second, the church eliminated a repository of dangerous knowledge. Cainhurst's libraries contained texts that predated the church's formation, wisdom that might have revealed inconvenient truths about the old blood's nature and origin. The nobles understood blood in ways the church perhaps didn't, their Pthumerian heritage giving them insights that crude experimentation couldn't replicate. By destroying Cainhurst, the church ensured their version of blood's power would be the only one that survived. Third, and perhaps most importantly, the church created a powerful cautionary tale. The Vilebloods became the boogeyman that justified the church's strict control over blood ministration. Any deviation from church doctrine could lead to becoming like the Vilebloods, corrupted, inhuman, deserving only of death. This fear kept Yharnam's citizens dependent on the church, unable to seek alternatives even as the beast scourge ravaged their streets. The forbidden blood that started all of this remains one of Bloodborne's most intriguing mysteries. Was it truly different from the old blood the church used? Or was the difference merely in how it was applied? Some scholars theorize it was the blood of Queen Johanna herself, which would explain why it resonated so strongly with Cainhurst's Thumerian-descended nobles. Others suggest it was blood from a different Great One entirely, one whose properties threatened the careful balance the Church tried to maintain. What we know for certain is that this blood didn't cause the bestial scourge that plagued Johanna. The Vilebloods didn't transform into the werewolf-like beasts that prowled the streets. They became something else, something that retained human intelligence and form while gaining superhuman abilities. This suggests that the method of blood consumption, the bloodline of the consumer, or both played crucial roles in determining blood's effects. The Church's one-size-fits-all approach to blood ministration was perhaps the true source of Johanna's beast problem, not the varied and refined techniques Cainhurst developed. The concept of blood dregs adds another layer to this mystery. These special drops only form in the blood of those who have consumed massive quantities of blood echoes. Essentially, they only appear in hunters who have grown powerful through killing. The Vilebloods weren't randomly attacking innocents. They were hunting hunters, creating a predator-prey relationship within the already violent ecosystem of Johanna. Queen Annalise's consumption of these blood dregs wasn't about sustenance, but about accumulation of power, gathering enough strength to potentially create new life. The child of blood. This child of blood, the heir Annalise seeks to create, represents hope for the vile bloodline's continuation, but it also represents something more profound. In a world where great ones lose their children and seek surrogates among humanity, where human women birth grotesque infant great ones, Annalise seeks to create something in between. A child born of concentrated blood power, heir to both human nobility and something beyond human understanding. Whether this child would be humanity's salvation or damnation remains unknown, buried beneath Logarius's eternal vigil and the Church's propaganda. The true tragedy of Cainhurst becomes clear when we strip away the religious rhetoric and examine the raw facts. An entire noble lineage was exterminated not because they were monsters, but because they represented an alternative to the Church's power. Men, women, and children were slaughtered not because they threatened humanity, but because they threatened a monopoly. A queen was imprisoned for centuries, not because she was evil, but because she couldn't be killed, and her survival challenged the narrative of the Church's absolute victory. Even the term Vileblood itself is a tragedy. In Japanese, they're called the Blood Clan, or Blood Family, terms that suggest kinship and belonging rather than corruption. They saw themselves as a family united by blood, continuing traditions that predated the Church and would have outlasted it if not for Logarius's genocidal crusade. The English translation's use of vile was likely intentional. Another layer of propaganda to ensure no one would question whether the executioner's cause was just. Martyr Logarius himself becomes a tragic figure when viewed through this lens. He dedicated his existence to guarding against a threat that was largely manufactured by the institution he served. His eternal vigil, sitting frozen atop Cainhurst's highest tower, isn't protecting humanity from monsters, it's protecting the Church's lies from being exposed. Every moment of his undead existence is spent ensuring that no one can speak to Annalise, no one can hear her side of the story, no one can question whether the massacre was justified. The fact that hunters can still join the Vileblood covenant, can still collect blood dregs for their queen, proves that Logarius failed in his ultimate goal. Despite the massacre, despite centuries of propaganda, despite an eternal guardian blocking the way, the Vilebloods persist. Their survival isn't just physical but ideological. They represent the idea that there are alternatives to the Church's way, that power can be achieved through means other than those sanctioned by Yharnam's religious authorities. As we near the end of this tragic tale, we must confront an uncomfortable truth about Bloodborne's world, and perhaps our own. The Vilebloods were destroyed not because they were evil, but because they were different. Their crime wasn't corruption, but competition. Their sin wasn't drinking blood. Everyone in Yharnam did that. But drinking it in a way that didn't require the church's permission or blessing. They were eliminated because their very existence asked dangerous questions. What if the church isn't necessary? What if there are other paths to transcendence? What if the monsters we're told to fear are simply those who refuse to conform? The frozen castle of Cainhurst stands as a monument to religious extremism and political violence, dressed up as holy necessity. Its halls, haunted by the ghosts of slaughtered nobles, echo with unspoken truths about the price of power and the cost of maintaining monopolies. Every snowflake that falls in that eternal winter carries with it the weight of lives ended not in the name of humanity's protection, but in the service of institutional power. Yet there's hope in this tragedy, a glimmer of resistance that refuses to be extinguished. Queen Annalise survives, her dignity intact despite centuries of imprisonment. Vileblood descendants walk among Yharnam's citizens, their blood carrying the potential for alternative paths to power. Hunters continue to seek out the Queen, to join her covenant, to question the Church's narrative about what happened at Cainhurst and why. The story of the Vilebloods teaches us to question the victor's version of history, to look beyond propaganda and examine evidence, to ask who benefits when certain groups are labelled as monsters that must be destroyed. In Yharnam, as in our world, those who control the narrative control perception, and those who control perception can justify almost any atrocity as necessary for the greater good. As we reach the conclusion of this investigation into one of gaming's most haunting genocides, I want to thank you for joining me on this journey through Cainhurst's frozen halls and blood-stained history. The story of the Vilebloods isn't just about a fictional tragedy in a video game. It's about the patterns of power, persecution, and propaganda that repeat throughout history, virtual and otherwise. It's about how institutions create enemies to justify their authority, how different becomes dangerous in the eyes of those who demand conformity, how violence becomes holy when wrapped in religious rhetoric. If this deep dive into Bloodborne's lore has given you new perspectives on Cainhurst's tragedy, if you found yourself questioning the Healing Church's version of events, I hope you'll consider subscribing to the channel. Here at Keen 7 Lore, we'll continue to explore gaming's darkest corners, to question the narratives we're given, to seek truth in worlds built on mysteries and lies. Your support helps keep these investigations going, allows us to spend the time needed to uncover every detail, examine every piece of evidence, question every assumption. Share your own theories about the Vilebloods in the comments below. Do you believe they were truly corrupted, or simply different? Was Logarius a holy martyr or a genocidal zealot? Could the child of blood have been humanity's salvation or its doom? These questions don't have easy answers, and that's what makes them worth asking. The beauty of Bloodborne's storytelling is that it gives us enough information to form theories, but never quite enough to be certain, forcing us to grapple with ambiguity and uncertainty, just as the characters in its world must. Remember to ring that notification bell so you won't miss our next investigation. We'll be diving into more of gaming's greatest mysteries, uncovering the stories that developers hide in item descriptions and environmental details, the narratives that require dedication and curiosity to fully understand. Whether it's the tragic fate of other Bloodborne characters, the hidden histories of Dark Souls kingdoms, or the cosmic mysteries of gaming's most enigmatic titles. We'll be there to explore them together. Thank you once again for spending this time with me in the frozen halls of Cainhurst, for listening to the silenced voices of the Vilebloods, for questioning the stories we're told about who deserves to live and who must die. Until next time, fellow lore seekers, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, in worlds built on blood and lies, sometimes the greatest truth is found in what the powerful try hardest to hide. This has been Keen 7 Lore, and I'll see you in the next investigation.